Hey, hello and welcome. Thank you for joining this special faculty webinar on Children and Technology, a conversation on engagement strategies. Thank you also to the Tufts Office of Alumni Relations for organizing this event and to Tufts AV for hosting. Today, we're joined by two amazing professors and colleagues of mine from Tufts University who work with technology and education. First, we'll hear from Professor Marina Bers. Marina is the chair of the Eliot-Pearson Child Study and Human Development Department and holds a secondary appointment in the Computer Science Department as well. She is the director of the Developmental Technologies Research Group, also called DevTech, where her interdisciplinary team of students and researchers designs, implements, and evaluates novel technologies for children in preschool through second grade. She is also the author of several books on young children and technology, most recently, Coding as a Playground, Programming and Computational Thinking in the Early Childhood Classroom. We'll also meet Professor Merredith Portsmore. Merredith is the director of the Tufts Center for Engineering, Education and Outreach, also called the CEEO, as well as a research assistant professor. Her research interests focus on how children engage in constructing solutions to engineering design problems, and her outreach work focuses on creating resources for K-12 educators to support engineering education in the classroom. She's the founder of Stomp, LegoEngineering.com, and the online Teacher Engineering Education Program, or TEAP. She's one of the authors of the CEEO's newest book, Novel Engineering K-8, an integrated approach to engineering and literacy. We're also joined by Mickey Shaloub of the CEEO, who will be sharing resources and information as we talk in the chat window. You're also welcome to post any questions or comments that you'd like in the Q&A window at any time throughout this webinar. Finally, my name is Dr. Amanda Strawhacker, and I will be your host for this webinar. I'll be moderating. I'm the Associate Director of the Early Childhood Technology Graduate Certificate Program, also called ECT. We love our acronyms. And my research involves designing tools and environments for children to explore biology, technology, making, and coding education for early childhood. Our speakers are both experts in playfully bringing technology, computer programming, and engineering design into education, but they focus on learners at different ages and developmental stages. Today, they're going to share lessons from their research on the different impacts that technology can have on children and learners in different developmental levels, and also describe ways that children and learners can use technology for creativity, community building, and self-expression. We'll start with Marina. Marina, thank you so much for joining this webinar today. I always love meeting you on or off stage in any capacity to talk about your work. In the many years that I've known you, I've often heard you talk about coding for children as an expressive platform, as a literacy, and as a playground. I'm hoping that you can share with us today what it is about coding in early childhood that's so important to you.
Right. So thank you, Amanda, and hi, everyone. It's nice to be here to share this opportunity with you, Amanda, and with Mer. Nice to see you over there. So coding can be seen in many ways. So most of the time we're used to associate coding with computer programming, something that happens sitting in front of a computer. Well, that's old, right? That's a very, very old stereotype. When we think about coding, we think as a playground, especially when we think for young children. When we think of young children, where is the best place where they learn, where they develop? It is the playground. In the playground, they use their physical bodies, they run around, they use their imaginations, they can make sandcastles, they can climb up and down trees, they can explore different structures, they learn how to talk and communicate with other children. They can invent their own games and solve problems. They also learn how to solve conflict, because not everything is fun in a playground. We hear, no, it's mine, and they learn how to problem solve. So playgrounds, I joke with students in Child Development 101 that you can see all of the dimensions of human development in a playground. You have cognitive development, social-emotional development, moral development, personal development. And so what best than a playground metaphor to think about coding environments for children? And if we contrast the coding playground with a coding playpen, a playpen is a very limited space. It's a space where children can do very little things. And so translate that to the world of technology, we might have an app that engages 4 or 5 year olds in repeating letters or doing math, but that's not really learning. That is just repeating things. So we don't want playpens, we do want playgrounds. In the playpen, children will learn one thing and that's it, and they will get bored and they'll move on to the next thing within 15 minutes. In a playground, if you've ever been to a playground, you know that you can be up to 2-3 hours in the playground. Children want more and more, and they have autonomy. And really, in early childhood, you want to have places where you can be autonomous and you can be in control and you can become a master of your world. And when we, in our work, we design playgrounds. So that means programming languages that are developmentally appropriate for young children, such as Scratch Junior and Kibo, which are, which are things that children could create their own animations and their own expressions. So that's number one. In terms of development, we want coding playgrounds. There's places for playing, for running around, for creating, for connecting. And number two is learning how to program is learning a new language. And if we understand languages as systems of symbols of representation, right? If you think of I'm from Argentina originally, I speak Spanish, then I learn English. Well, how to learn how to read and write in those languages require me to learn that letters match to sounds, and then how to write those letters. So it's a symbolic system of representation. If you think of programming languages, they are also symbolic systems of representation. And if we treat them as such, they have powerful expressive opportunities, because you can create your own application, your own animation, your own robot that shakes around. And so switching the perspective from teaching coding only as a STEM discipline, like science, technology, engineering, and math, problem solving only activity, towards a perspective that understands coding as learning a new language, because language is for expression, for creation, for communication. And once you learn how to think in a language, you cannot go back. That's what it is. And then it's simpler to do, to learn different kinds of languages. Once you learn how to write in English, it's going to be easier to learn how to write in Spanish and Portuguese and other languages.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Marina, for clarifying the answer to that question about how we can conceive of coding as a playground, coding as a literacy, coding as a platform. So now we're going to turn briefly to Merredith. And I have a question for you, Merredith, also. First of all, thank you for joining us and sharing with us today. In our work together, I've always been just so impressed by the ways that your research and your curriculum development always manages to infuse creativity and exploration into disciplinary engineering and STEM skills and practices. I wonder if you could share with us today what engineering and making education can offer for middle to high school learners, for example.
Surely. Thanks, Amanda, and thanks everybody for being here. I see lots of familiar names in the attendees. Engineering is really such an interesting thing in terms of, as a discipline all by itself, it's fairly unique, right? Even the professionals who do engineering at Apple, Tesla, Google, they have to go through this iterative process, right? They find a problem in the world, they think they have an idea for it, and they try out ideas that fail, right, don't work, and then they have to keep going. And for me, this is such a powerful thing to think about with children from very small to the undergraduates we work with, because it's this idea that you have agency in the world to make changes. And I think now more than ever, that's so important. So a core part of our work, right, is helping to children to see themselves as agentive problem solvers and to explore all these different ideas with hands-on tools. So we really want students to come away with this idea of, like Marina said, not memorizing things, but knowing how to work through different technologies and tools to solve problems. Right, that next generation of students that we have as our own children or in our classroom are the ones that are going to tackle clean air, renewable energy, fully mapping the human genome. And whether they're doing that as a STEM professional, which is fabulous, or they're doing it from a policy perspective or as a teacher in the classroom, we want everybody to have gone through that process of making, trying, iterating, so that they're not just doing worksheets and memorizing things, but that they're actually developing the skills that go with that. We think there's a lot of things that happen when you do those problems, whether you're building your first popsicle stick bridge or you're building a robot that can navigate a maze, right? You're thinking about the problem. You're able to try out some ideas, whether you're physically making and exploring principles in statics or dynamics or mechanics. or coding, right? You're trying these things out and you're really getting to do them. And of course, that doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? Kids work on teams, so they get to do, figure out how to include other people's ideas. And the really great thing, right, about engineering, right, is that there's this really nice space for solution diversity, right? There's not one right answer either, right? If we give kids interesting problems, like design something to help get across a body of water, there's a lot of solutions to that. Boats, bridges, self-folding bridges. There's this great space to be able to say what makes sense here. And that space also gives us a lot of connections to other disciplines. So if I really care about who uses my product, I really need to understand my client or the community that I'm working in. So we talk about skills of empathy and being able to really see that. We also talk about like systems thinking, like, well, yeah, if you put a dam here, that makes all kinds of, energy for a region, but what are the consequences from that? So it's a great organizer for all these different kinds of thinking that we want to see going forward in all students, in all citizens, right? You're going to have to vote on, where does that power plant go or who goes into office. So having folks have that rich understanding, I think, is really important. And in our work, we're always trying to figure out how do we structure learning environments where that happens. So is there a space for kids? We look for tools that kids can manipulate, whether it's different pieces of found materials and recyclables that they're figuring out how to make into a city, or it's higher end robotics and programming tools that they're able to actually make things they're interested in, right? We get hamburger makers, we get golf courses, we get musical instruments. So that space is really important there.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Meredith. I love what you said about thinking about, creating agentive learners, agents of learning who are really involved in their own development process, as well as connecting engineering to those other domains that maybe you don't automatically associate, but actually are really richly embedded, like civics and ethics and social development as well. So now I'm going to turn it over to, I think, what will promise to be my favorite part of this webinar. We're going to have a joint conversation now between Marina and Meredith. So thank you both for your individual responses. I'm going to ask you a prompt now, and feel free to ask me to rephrase or focus in on one part of it. It's a little bit long, but we often hear researchers and educators in the field of educational technology use the phrase creators, not consumers, or sometimes you hear producers, not consumers, when talking about the kind of learning we want to see in a robotics classroom or an engineering clubhouse. I wonder if you could unpack that sentiment a little bit for us and describe why creating or producing is so important to introduce to young learners.
Okay, so I'll go, Mer. So when you create something, you bring your own self, your individuality. And Meredith touched a little bit on this when she talked about solution diversity. And maybe if you're not very familiar with their work, with the wonderful work that they do at CEO, maybe that's a word that just passed by. But that basically means that all solutions to a problem will be different. And I will take it a little bit step forward. When you're creating something, it usually starts as a result of a question you have. And my question is going to be different than your question than someone else's question. And when you want to go from an idea, right, to a final product that you can share with others, and you engage in the design process, iteratively revise and fix and go back, you have to have a lot of passion, because if you don't have a lot of passion, somehow you're not going to be able to complete it, because things are not going to work for sure. That we know for sure. When building or with programming, we know one thing: first try is never going to work. And if it works, it's because we didn't do it right, right? So we need to really be able to commit, to persevere, to stick to a problem and not give up. And that we can only do it if we're passionate. And so what we really strive for is to provide opportunities for children to create projects that are meaningful for them, and not just follow a worksheet or an assignment that the teacher gives to them, but really to come up with their own questions. Because at the end, if we want a society of innovators, which we need to tackle some of the problems that Merredith addressed before, but also some new ones that will come and we can't even label right now, we will need people with new ideas. And new ideas come from the gut, from the emotion, not from the intellect, from the passion. I want to do something.
That's so, yeah, Marina and I are totally aligned here. So you guys won't get different perspectives here today. It's so interesting. One of the stories I always think about is I often teach in over the years in the first year engineering program here at Tufts. And lots of students get here and they don't know how to do an open-ended problem. So we say, design something for, you know, design a new toy. And they're like, you mean a remote control car? I'm like, no, that already exists. Design something new. So, right, that creators, not consumers mentality is really developed over the years, right? If we're constantly giving kids feedback that they can't be the ones who get the answers, that they aren't the ones who can evaluate, you know, whether something works or not works, you know, I think we start to really set the ways that they interact with the world, right? And not thinking that they have agency, but thinking that this is a game we play all the way up, and that game runs out. That game runs out in undergraduate education. And that's what I think the hands-on tools that DevTech does, that CEO does, right? They're really tools where the students can use to try their own ideas, and they get physical, or, you know, so whether it's coding or physical feedback, they can see whether it works or not. And they learn to say like, oh, you have to notice what works, right? Whereas when you hand in that worksheet, you get it back and you're like, oh, yeah, I don't know why that's wrong. I don't know why that didn't work. So it really changes this power and authority dynamic, which is important for all students, but particularly folks who have been marginalized, right? We continue to do that kind of work with them. So we want to make sure that this kind of creator, not consumer mentality is really everywhere, so that we're supporting equity, right? And we're supporting that kind of thinking.
Thank you both so much. So that makes sense to me. Maybe I'll just paraphrase for listeners. So that creators, not consumers mentality is helpful for developing personal passion, personally motivated and meaningful projects that kids and learners are working on, and making sure that they're not accepting the world as it's made for them, but really taking ownership over their experience. So that's some of the reasons that I also happen to align with that perspective as well. And Mary, you started to bring this up, so I'd like to circle back to this. A lot of times we get the question, well, actually, I'll back up. I think one of the things that DevTech and the CEEO do that really inspires me is all of the outreach and the ways that both groups really connect, not just with researchers or with other people who think about this in terms of an education at a high level, but people on the ground floor, children, families, educators. I wonder what resources or projects are available at both research groups that can support interested adults or children who want to learn more about making, coding, engineering education, and what opportunities there are to get involved.
Yeah, so we definitely have been trying to kind of push back on the ivory tower, right? That research turns into practice. A lot of our work, right, is from working with teachers and students and saying, oh, this is what's really happening here, and how can we support those folks in productive ways? And that's what's really powerful about all the work that happens at Tufts. We have a couple of different mechanisms there. We do courses for educators in that space. We do programs for students. And Bet McGee will put those all into the chat there. We've been doing some webinars over the course of the summer to have some of those conversations with folks. And we're always eager to hear from and talk to folks about those spaces. So we do a lot of different work in schools and whatnot. And all those websites, of course, have links and stuff so you can reach out and contact to us. We're really excited about having both those pieces there. And so I'll hand it over to Marina to talk about all the great DevTech resources.
Yeah, so for us, just like for the CEO, it's very important. So all of our research projects involve teachers, families, and parents. And so when we designed Scratch Junior or when we designed Kibo in our lab, it took us 3 years before those were launched out into the world, because all 3 years we were working with parents and with children and with teachers. And now that we have gained a lot of expertise over the years, we've been around for 20 years or more. We are able to give back all of our learning. So during the summer, we always have professional development workshops. This is the first year we're not running one of them. And then, although we have a whole series of online webinars for people that are pre-recorded and people can go out there and check them out. And 4 years ago, we started the Early Childhood Technology Program, that it's an online program. So it's 2 courses online with 1 week at the Eliot-Pearson Children's School, which is a lab school that this year is turning 100 years. So people from all over the world have signed up. We have people from Dubai, people from Saudi Arabia, Brazil, Argentina, Portugal, as well as, of course, US people. And so people can do these courses online, they learn online, but then they come to task for 1 week where they are actually working with young kids, because it's not the same to know the technology as to know how to work with little kids. Working with little kids, it's not easy, especially if you need to get them to stick to a goal and program and not cry if things don't work. So it's a different technique, right? And so they spend that week in Boston learning. We also have, if you go to our DevTech website, we have a link for educators. We also have developed over the years over 20 curriculum units for both keyboard robotics that doesn't require screens, it's just you program with wooden blocks, and also for Scratch Junior. We have them aligned with all kinds of curriculum frameworks, so you can go there and just download for free the PDFs. We also have developed and are currently developing assessments that can be done online. And actually, this is brand off the oven. I think that's how we say it in English. Or the metaphor is we are launching a program to try our new measurements virtually with little kids. So if you have a 4 to 7 year old at home that thinks would like to play with Scratch Junior or Kibo, please email me afterwards, and we can include you in our mailing list. So yeah, so tons of opportunities. We also every so often run conferences, and we've done things with the CEO in the past together. And I think those are wonderful because it's important to know that we are very aligned in our perspective about how kids learn, regardless the age of the kids. We all learn by doing. We learn by doing when we're 5, we learn by doing when we're 15, we learn by doing when we're 50. So it's very important to see that there is a progression in how we start working in early childhood and how we continue learning as kids get older.
Amazing. Thank you both so much for those responses and those thoughtful insights that we can all reflect on. So I want to point your attention again, viewers and listeners, to the chat function. If you're curious about any of the resources that were just described, we have McGee dutifully pasting all of those links in there, and you will receive these as well in a follow-up email, so don't be too worried. But now I want to turn to the Q&A portion of this webinar, and we've been getting some really amazing questions. So I'm going to try to synthesize, because we have so many, a few questions, and I'll start with one for Mer, actually, that I think maybe both of you could take on, but this might pertain directly to the CEO research. So someone asked, Meredith, what you said about the undergraduate students sort of being a little risk averse with new ideas, or not having that risk-taking mentality when starting a new project. I wonder if you could sort of unpack that a little bit. How can we encourage learners, and especially older youth, because many of the comments are sort of in agreement here that younger children are a little bit braver in some ways in this area. But what can we do for older learners to encourage them to think more creatively and outside the box?
Yeah, that's a great question. And all my answers will not mediate the fact that it's hard, right? Like once we get folks into that space that there's a single right answer and that I should be doing this one thing, that's a hard shift. I think one of the things we've seen our really capable teachers do, and facilitators at Tufts, is we have to create a different space, right? A lot of that risk comes from fear, right? I'm afraid that I'm not going to get a good grade. I'm afraid that I don't have the skills to do what it is. So we play with a lot of different kinds of things that are ungraded to do, right, to have that kind of space. Things that are on different kind of teams, right? If you put 4 folks on a team together, who's dominating the conversation, and also spaces to learn, right? In what way, I want you to take on something and I want you to do something new. So sometimes the structure of it. But then there's also scaffolding, right? Like, okay, I'm gonna do brainstorming activities with you. We do all kinds of different ones. There's all kinds of brainstorming activities out there. There's design heuristics cards, where you can really say, oh, all right, you made it this way. Now turn it upside down. Now flip it. Now try and figure out how to make it reusable, how to make it portable, how to make it this way. So that's definitely something that we have to invest in developing. And I'm hopeful also that as we do more of this work with younger students, that we can preserve some of that fearlessness and creativity.
Awesome. Thank you for that answer, Mer. So now I have a question, sort of a combination of questions for Marina. So people have been asking specifically about the youngest students, and actually, Mer, you work with K through 12, so you might want to pipe in here too. A number of questions, I'll try to combine them. So one is, how young is too young? When do we want to start introducing coding, engineering, really all things STEM, and how do we begin that? And then sort of as a corollary to that, in this time and this moment when kids are sort of glued to their screen as their only option for social engagement, or maybe you're in lockdown, whatever your situation is regarding, for example, the pandemic, how are we making sure that we're still creating a sense of passion and wonder while also bridging that physical and virtual challenge that so many families and schools are facing? So I'll let you sort of take a moment to reflect on that.
Yeah, so first, these are very relevant questions. So first, the question of how young is young. So it depends, not all STEM activities are the same. If you want to engage, and so we need to, and not all technologies are the same. So we first really need to unpack the question and try to understand, what do we want children to do? The question should focus on children, not on the technology. And so if we want children to really understand that sequence matters, and that there's an abstraction and there's a logic behind a program, then and that's the beginning of programming, of computer programming, we recommend starting at around 4 or 5 year olds. Depends, all children are different, and developmentally they are at very different places. It's very unlikely that a 2-year-old will be able to understand sequencing in complex ways. They might be able to understand cause and effect, cause and consequence. I do this happens, but they will not have the cognitive load or the memory span or the memory attention to really understand beyond. So we recommend 4 and up. But the most important thing is, what are the powerful ideas that we want children to understand? So some of those powerful ideas I'm going to talk mostly about programming, right? Because we teach coding, and we can teach coding through robotics if the robots are developmentally appropriate and use woods and things like that, like Kibo, or we can teach coding through a block-based programming language that's on the screen, like Scratch Junior. So there needs to be a match between the language I give to the child and what's developmentally possible for them. If I give a Robolab or C++ to a 4-year-old, it's going to be very hard. They don't know how to read, right? Even logo, it would be very hard for them. So I think we need to, that's for question number 1. For question number 2, in terms of the pandemics, I completely relate to that. And that's why I want to bring back the playground. So I think we should focus on really, what are the activities, what are the behaviors that we want children to be engaged in? In our work, we talk about the positive technological development framework, and we talk about 6 C's, which are creating content, communicating, collaborating, community building, making choices of conduct, and communication. And so those 6 C's, we know they lead to positive behaviors, and those are things we can do with or without technology. So I would encourage parents or teachers to really find opportunities outside and inside to promote these kinds of behaviors in young children. And sometimes we might want to use the technology. So technology at this point is great to build connections. Generations, the older folks are stuck at home all over the world. And so this is a great opportunity to use technology to connect. Maybe not to just do one more time the video game, but to create a video or to create a song. Again, this creator's mentality, to compose a story using pictures, and then especially to communicate with people who might not be so familiar with technology, but might benefit from receiving the younger kids' stories.
Yeah, I'll just chime in there. I think on the engineering side, like kids start all on their own, right? Their first forts, their first block towers, their first they think, right, of these things as being for them. And so supporting and encouraging that. Do they have things they can make and build with outside? Do they have things they can make and build with inside? And I'll answer the other part as a parent, right? During the pandemic, I have had a very different set of rules, as like my children created Minecraft worlds for their cousins as birthday presents, but they were talking back and forth and figuring out what would this cousin like, and could we make fireworks, and how do you figure out how to make fireworks light up? And as I sat and listened, I'm like, these are all things I care about. These are all things I want to hear, right? So like, you know, the screen has been villainized, but if I close my eyes and think about all the things I'm hearing when students or my own children are doing that kind of thing, right? Those are things I want to hear. I want to hear them negotiating. I want to hear them, you know, making proposals for how they design something, trying it out, and then iterating on it. So, you know, drawing on Marina's positive technological development framework, can't talk today, right? If we're seeing good things that we care about, then, right, wherever they're happening, right, we want to support that and continue to encourage children to do that kind of piece.
Amazing. Thank you both so much for that really thoughtful reflection on, you know, the way that you're using the technology and the moments that you choose to use it for that. Again, we're getting back to, I think, that creative producing, not consuming metaphor. So we've talked a little bit about questions from some parents and a few from educators. I now want to, in our last 3 minutes, pose two very good questions, and you can take up one or the other or both. We've had a question about how can designers of these technologies or creators of, for example, games and tools imbue that spirit of sort of playful creativity, passion in the design work that they do? And also, how do we communicate all of this amazing opportunity that we see in technology-rich education to, for example, districts and principals? We have one attendee from a Title I school who has mandated minutes for math and literacy that does not allow time for creative learning. And they're just wondering, you know, what are the ways to sort of change people's minds about this and get a little more buy-in from those who can really enact change?
Okay, I guess I'll take, I see, I'll go with the second one, because the second one, it is a problem. It is a problem. We have to be realistic about that. We have policies going one direction and research going the other direction, and they don't talk often, because we know from a research perspective that we learn by integrating. We learn better by putting together disciplines. And that's why engineering, for example, is so wonderful, because it brings together a lot of the disciplines, right? So research knows that, and they know it for years. However, policy goes from a different direction. And if we need to really think about what's the role of schools, because the school as we know them were developed in the Industrial Revolution, and they were serving a very different role and function that they are serving today. Right? And that's why we see so many proliferations of other informal learning environments like makerspaces. And sometimes you see, for example, makerspaces trying to go into schools, but then they are schoolized, right? And then the makerspace becomes just like another school. So I think it's very important. The first thing is very, very important. Who can affect policy? Well, parents can affect policy, because parents sit on school boards. But parents will not know, because they were raised in a different generation, right? When learning was all about sitting behind the desk and an educator saging the stage model. So for us, a lot of the work we do is educating parents together with children, because parents need to learn about a new way of learning. And if they understand these new ways of learning, they'll be able to push their districts, their schools, you know, their neighborhoods for a different kind of education and be more involved. So before, when we were talking about coding and citizens and having a civic voice, well, this is what we mean. If you understand how you can learn in a playground approach, you're going to fight for that. And you're not just going to sit idle when they try to impose more and more restrictions. We don't learn in 45 minutes at a time. And that's just an artificiality caused by the education as a system that was designed in a different time period to serve different needs. So that's kind of my response to that question. I don't know, Mary, if you want to add something to this or to the other one.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an exciting time. I think we're seeing we're seeing both. We're seeing more rigid games and curriculum responding to the rigidity of policy, but like in the toy space, right? There's a lot more players that are trying to make open-ended and more playground / sandbox type pieces. I mean, I think we need to vote with our dollars and make sure that that's what is being purchased and identified. And it's not a tough thing, but I'll give a shout out and we'll put it in there. Like Purdue's Inspire Center for Engineering Education does an awesome gift guide each year that has all of these open-ended creative products in it, which I think can help folks navigate that space. And I agree with all the things Marina is saying. It really needs to be a push from families, and we'd love to hear from you guys and from others, just more ways we can share this work with you to help do it, because I think we're seeing a really interesting moment where parents have a lot of power, and we need to push on what happens in the classroom. But I'm sure you've all been in conversations. I was chatting with a fellow parent one day, and they're like, this teacher does not give out any worksheets. I'm not sure what's happening in that classroom. I'm like, she's doing all these crazy cool hands-on projects. That's amazing. That's great. But that accountability and that, as Marina said, that sense of what's happened in classrooms is really stable. So that's a piece I think we can all take up.
Yeah, I want to follow up with that. Usually when we think of education, we think about how can we best educate kids. And I like to turn it around. And sometimes when I think about education and systemic change, I think, how can I best educate parents? Because the parents are really the ones that are going to be able to push for the system changing with their vote and with their voices at town halls and on teacher meetings and things like that. So maybe we should shift and start thinking about how we educate parents about what learning is all about, together with teachers and children.
Yeah, and I mean that goes for folks' policy votes across there, right? We're of course in university, we're funded by federal funding to study these things and to create initiatives, and that's really important to continue to develop these kind of cool pieces, and also to develop more evidence for why this is really impactful. I mean, these are really, there's so many longitudinal medical studies, but Ed Research is still working to develop all the evidence there of why these things are productive and what the long-term impacts are. That kind of work is really challenging, and we would love to see more of it happening in the field, because sometimes 3 hours of doing this is not something we can always say is going to make sure that when you're 18 you're going to be a creative, agentive adult. I liken it to broccoli, right? Every time you eat a piece of broccoli, you can't measure what happened, but the cumulative effects of doing this in early childhood, continuing on and being able to do these kinds of problems, when we talk to students, we see that initial evidence that it's powerful.
Amazing, thank you so much. And we still have about 2 more minutes, actually, I'm learning. So as a follow-up to this question, someone is asking, for a teacher, do you have suggestions on extending this conversation? So all of the resources for parents and getting parents activated is really important to hear. Do you have specific ideas about just one-on-one talking to an administrator or getting a specific district engaged? Or maybe you could share success stories from each lab that has sort of started that work. Yeah,
so I think, but before I go into this, I want to say, I will answer this question because it's a very good question. But before that, a thought that I had from before was that, when we talk in my group about coding as a literacy, coding as a language, we don't just mean it technically, we also mean learning about such a long history that we have on literacy, education, and research, because that field has done all the longitudinal research that we in educational technology are just starting, because it's newer field. And if we learn from the field of literacy education, we know that there were huge family literacy movements, right? And so we need, and those happen in the doctor's offices and not just at schools, that there were really all the ecosystem where children were. So when we talk about coding as literacy, we also mean that. We mean learning from the literacy movement all over the world that really took literacy as a family event and it put it in every single place that children can be found. So that's as a corollary for the last question. For this question, I think that you need to start with what the school is doing well, right? And that's our advice. So every school has one project that they are very proud about, or one event. And so our success stories was where we were able to tap into those. So for example, some of the schools had one integrative unit at the end that brought together the math, the science, the language arts into a project where they would invite family or family members or community members. So we try to say, okay, teacher or principal, find something that you are passionate about, that you think you're already doing well, that you think you have figured it out, and now see how you can bring computer programming or robotics or engineering into that. And that seems to work well because it's not recreating the wheel, it's adding some new dimension to something that the school already had figured out how to do it.
Yeah, I'll echo that, right? Our biggest success to date has been our novel engineering project, which integrated engineering and literacy. So you took the books that teachers were already using in the classroom and thought, how could those characters become clients? So, right, you're designing for the duck and Make Way for Duckling. You're designing for Naya in Long Walk to Water. Because as Marina says, it pushes towards that incremental piece, right? Not a whole reimagining, but saying, okay, what could you make for this character? How would you make it? Let's test it out and see if it works. The other thing we've seen teachers do right is find safe spaces to do this in smaller pieces and, you know, use that as evidence for how powerful it is. So if it's after standardized testing, if it's right before vacation, to start generating like, look what happens, look how people show up. We've heard from teachers who, you know, like when we declare that Friday is engineering day, everybody comes to school, right? Because they know they want to do that hands-on project. So that's another way of, you know, depending on what your school and population use, like, of generating your own data. That being said, you know, right, it's quite an onus to put on teachers. So I applaud you for taking it on. That shouldn't be things, but we know teachers are amazing doing that. But where can you generate your own data to push back on, you know, in my school with these kids, this is powerful for all kinds of reasons, whether it, you know, aligns with your social emotional curriculum, or it aligns with your literacy curriculum, or it aligns with, you know, attendance and engagement. It can be all of these pieces can really be a lever for some of those.
And on top of that, I think there is a need of professional development. So, you know, teachers should be pushing for that, because it's very hard to be trying to do something if you're not trained, and then it's going to go wrong, and then you will not be able to collect the evidence that Merredith is talking about. So I think it's really important. And in our own experience, successful projects in professional development involve the principals as well, not just the teachers. Because if the principals don't really understand the work, they will not be able to do the accommodations that the school day and the curriculum need. So I'm more and more a believer that, you know, administrators should not just send the teachers, should really participate. Or, you know, we started to play around with creating special professional developments that maybe are shorter for principals, but it's also hard for them to understand what we're talking about if they never experience themselves.
Excellent.
For sure.
So sorry to interrupt, but we're right at time. I want to thank both of you for, you know, how many times have I heard you talk, and I still feel really inspired and fired up every time. So thank you for sharing those thoughts and comments about, you know, getting administrators in on the conversation, thinking about what you're already succeeding at, and integrating technology in a way that feels natural for your space. I want to remind everyone, because we had so many incredible questions that we could not get to, that we will be sharing resources. So they're available for you in the chat. We will also be sharing an email, for example, with a flyer of all of the resources that we already shared and talked about, resources about the research we already do at DevTech and CEEO, resources for families and for parents, resources for educators. I encourage you all to check out all of the websites of the CEEO and the DevTech research groups, because those questions for designers and administrators, there's a lot of information there, and we really hope that you check it out and head over to the websites. So for now, I'm going to say thank you so much for attending. please feel free to reach out to either of our faculty guest speakers or myself at the email addresses that we'll be sharing in the chat. And Nikki, thank you so much for managing all of that resource sharing. So now I'm gonna go ahead and say thank you very much and mute myself.
Thanks all.
Thank you.